So today it's important to remember the way that the Lord teaches. There's this phrase, it's called +1 education. So it's this idea that you don't start the educational beginnings of a young person with calculus, with astrophysics, with biomolecular, biology or so. You start with ABCs, 1, 2, 3s. You start with sounds. You start with very basic principles. And it doesn't mean that you're denying all the rest of it, but you know that they're never going to reach that unless you start first with those basic blocks. And so here we're seeing the Lord giving more of those blocks to Israel first. We see this in the prophets. So you have the time of the Torah. And even if you look at that Exodus, and then you look at the same retelling of the Exodus and story of Numbers in Deuteronomy, you start seeing that even there's a going deeper into the heart. It starts originally, God is teaching the people by very external actions. So for instance, you shall not kill. You can't physically take the life of an innocent person. It's one of the 10 Commandments. But as you start going deeper, and it starts in Deuteronomy, and then you start seeing it in the prophets and in the wisdom literature, and in the prophets here, you see also this idea of it truly is that heart-to-heart responsibility with the Lord, that the Lord doesn't rejoice in the death of anyone. He wants them to come and turn to Him. Sometimes maybe in the Old Testament we'll see, these whole armies being laid low and, all of the Egyptians being drowned in the midst of the Red Sea. And the Lord is teaching in the midst of those moments there about the communal nature of sin. And also the responsibility of the hardness of Pharaoh and how that actually sadly hurts his entire nation. But now the Lord is saying, I want you to go deeper. I want you to understand that you have a responsibility for coming to me, for accepting my grace. And it talks about this beautiful experience of mercy, but also the challenge to not be complacent. Because what started to happen in Israel's heart is they started to say, well, as long as we're just part of the chosen people, as long as we're circumcised, as long as we're just sort of doing the things of the people of Israel, and we're not kind of physically cut off from the people, then we can kind of do whatever we want with our heart. And that's when Jesus speaks particularly against the Pharisees, who were focused on the letter of the law, but they gave a lot of room to their intentions to do kind of whatever they want. So they would, for instance, say, well, I haven't committed adultery. I haven't been physically unfaithful with my wife. But they would say, if I look this way, if I do this in the heart and no one really knows, well, then that's not really adultery. And that's when Jesus says, but I say to you, anyone who looks with lust in his heart has already committed adultery. And it continues on in this Sermon on the Mount that we hear in the Gospel today. We hear it's not enough to just say, well, I just haven't killed anyone. That's kind of a low bar to hit, is just to be like, all right, I didn't blow anything up. And yet the Lord is saying, look deeper into your heart. Is there the anger? Is there the resentment? Is there the desire for revenge? And even if you don't necessarily do it physically, is that still there? Because the Lord is saying, that's what I'm trying to show you now. I led you first to say, you can't do these physical actions that are against the law. But now go deeper. Go deeper into the heart. And the Lord's able to do this now because He's come And it's through his grace that he actually gives us the strength to be able to go deep into the heart and to allow him to root out sin. And so, going back to that first reading, we have to make sure that we're not complacent in the true examination of our heart. Because just like in that first reading, such great mercy for someone, even if they've done wicked things, but then they truly turn in their heart. Think of the people of Nineveh with Jonah. They turn. This metanoia, which means it's a turning of my mind and my heart back to God. Not just in actions, but also in the true intentions of my heart. And someone who does that, the Lord shows mercy to. But also someone who maybe has lived virtuous their whole life becomes complacent and says, well, I'm already part of the people of Israel, so I can give a little extra space to do what I want. And that's the great sadness of this first reading, is to say someone who's lived virtuously, someone who has lived holiness, can always at the very end say, no, I'm just going to do things my way. And they can turn. So let's ask the Lord for that grace to go deep into our heart, to always be honest with our heart. Because when we're honest in our heart, when we allow the Lord to encounter us there at the heart level, then we don't fall into complacency. The danger is when we live on the surface level and we just kind of go through life and we don't realize that our heart is starting to move far away from the Lord. And as the heart moves away from the Lord, it starts to calcify. It starts to become more numb to really hear the call of conversion. And it becomes cold and icy. And ultimately, that's the place where we start to become numb and we don't recognize sin in our life. Remember again, the Pharisees in the Gospel of John were mocking Jesus when they were talking about the healing of the blind man. And they said, well, surely we're not blind, are we? And Jesus, with a heavy heart, says, because you say that you're not blind, your sin still remains. Because in fact you are blind, not physically, but spiritually. And it didn't happen like this, but it was over this process of little by little not listening to God knocking on the heart. And little by little, the doors keep closing, multiple doors that create a buffer so that it becomes very difficult to hear the Lord. So let's ask the Holy Spirit, clear those doors away. Help me to make true examines of my heart. Examination of conscience is not merely just, well, I did this, I didn't do this, I did this, I didn't do this, because that can get exhausting, and that keeps us at a surface level. But the Holy Spirit is the one who guides us into our heart, and we start looking over our life. We start looking over our daily life. And in a very gentle way, when we're resting in that Spirit, when we're resting in the security that the Lord loves us, and anything that He's going to show about our heart, it's truly because He loves us and He wants us to turn to Him. So when we are cradled in His arms, then He can start very gently, but it can be painful at the same time, to touch those areas of our heart and to say, this is the area in which your intentions are warped. This is the area where there's selfishness. It's being cloaked in self-righteousness. There's pride. There's lust. There's envy. There's sloth. There's these different things that are there. And notice how when He does that, He doesn't accuse, He doesn't sort of push down, but it's this freeing moment in which it hurts. But it's this freeing moment in which you start to come alive in that. There's a pain of the knowledge that, wow, I really am prideful. But then in that, you're able to then have the courage to give it over to the Lord, and there's this freedom. I was just thinking, actually, right now, there's something I experienced a couple weeks ago. It was called muscle activation. And it actually speaks about this principle, I think. There can be a pressure point or so, and there can be a pain in that area. But what it does is it opens up the whole rest of the body to experience a deep peace, a deep healing, a deep freedom to breathe again. And that's the way that the Lord speaks into our heart. But sometimes we're afraid of that pain. And that's why we put up all the doors to say, no, I'm just going to kind of do things my way, and I really don't want to listen to my heart. Because it's sometimes a scary thing to listen to the quiet in the heart because of what we might find there. But if we trust the Lord, if we trust that even in that pain of recognizing, wow, my heart is more broken than I thought, He always does it out of a deep love to allow us to expand the lungs of the Spirit, to be able to breathe more freshly, to experience life in the way that we were made to. So let's go deep into our heart. Let's have courage to allow the doctor of our soul to touch those areas that can bring pain, but bring such a deep, deep peace afterwards.